Governor, it's so wonderful to have you here today in New York.
Our pleasure.
We're really so pleased. So tell me, what brings you here today on Yom Yerushalayim, and why are you here?
Well, we want to celebrate Jerusalem, but also we're on our way, literally in a few hours, we're on our way to Israel, not only into Jerusalem, but all around the country. And it's a place my wife and I have been at before. We always love going back there. We had a chance to meet again with the Prime Minister Netanyahu, and just in general express our gratitude to the people of Israel for being such a strong ally to the United States.
So are you pleased with your trip here so far? Are you?
Yeah. It's been great to see a bunch of old friends, as well as to see and meet some new friends along the way. And really just to reinforce, for example, my father was a minister. I'm an evangelical Christian. A lot of people who don't know much about religions think, well, why the strong connection to Israel? But for a lot of us in the evangelical community, the Old Testament is just as important as the New Testament in our mind. And we know that Jerusalem in particular, with the Old City, is critically important to that.
Right, and are you focused on the fact, I'm sure you are as a minister's son, on the fact that Jerusalem came about because it was in the parts of the land of Benjamin, and it was also in the parts of Judah. Yeah. So that made Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, of course, on that theory, was a city of peace, the city of where somebody stands up. So it's so wonderful to see the evangelical community standing up. What other reasons do you think there are that why evangelicals are so positive and so informative in regard to Israel?
Well, you even think back to 1967, and of course part of today's celebration is thinking about reclaiming the reunification of Jerusalem and the Old City into Israel. That's critically important for all of us who ever visit, as well as those living there, but particularly for someone like me visiting, because I look at the way things were before, and I think as a Christian, I wouldn't get to visit the Old City, the Holy City. One of the things that oftentimes, particularly a lot of people who work over here in the UN disregard about Israel, is that it's a free and open society. Not just the Jewish people, not just Christians. Obviously, Muslims can worship freely, unlike other parts of the Middle East, where there's only one group that gets their freedom of religion.
And as you say, unlike in the past, when no one could.
Well, and it's one of those things where I think it's so critically important to the world that be a place where people can have access to it. And right now, under the state of Israel, people can come freely into those areas, and that's critically important.
And what do you say to those who are critical of President Trump, despite the fact that we all know that his actions have been so amazing, whether it's in Jerusalem, moving the Embassy Act, whether it was Taylor Force, whether it was the Golan just now, and whether it's our economy as a whole. America has been so much better off, but yet there are the naysayers.
Right, lowest unemployment since December of 1969, lowest ever recorded for African American, Latino American, for people with disabilities, for our veterans. Never has it been lower in terms of the time they've spent recording this. And so I just look at that and say, in my mind, actions speak louder than words, or even tweets. And there may be a lot of people in Washington who maybe talk a little bit better than the president does on occasion, but I'd rather have someone who gets the job done, because there's a lot of talkers in Washington, both parties. There are very few people who actually put their money where their mouth is, and this president does that.
Right. Look, 25 years, right?
Yeah.
25 years before we moved.
Absolutely.
So many more years since the Embassy Act, and where the embassy actually moved last month.
Right, all the politicians, including some in both parties, including some of the leadership in the House right now, who said for years the embassy should be there. People in both parties have said it. This president was the only one who had the guts to actually do something.
Right, and not have the waivers.
Right.
So what do you think about where we're going with the peace plan? There's been so much written about it, and probably it will be postponed now until November. Do you think it's going to be presented then, or do you think we're going to be going so close to a presidential year that it might even be postponed for another 2 years?
It'll be interesting to see. Obviously, a lot depends on what happens in that region. I mean, we want peace, but Israel's got to have defensible borders. Any country does. It's the debate we're having here in America. If you can't defend your people, if you can't defend your country, then peace is rarely, never within your reach. And so once that kind of defensible borders can be established, both in Israel on a permanent basis and here in the United States, that gives us a step forward.
Well, what we know about the plan so far is that is a given, that there will be secure borders, and that is an important part of it.
Yeah.
The move to Bahrain now with economic focus is still another subject. But do you think at the end of the day that we need something other than a two-state solution?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. For years, politicians of both parties have talked about. This president has kind of backed away. I think it'll be interesting to watch, not just in the political cycle, but just in the whole global sense of what's happening. Again, I've toured. I'll be back touring over this next week in Israel. I think it makes sense where the boundaries are. And I think if you look, again, throughout that region, so many people have not traveled to Israel, don't fully recognize and appreciate this. But this is a place where, even though it's a Jewish state, people can practice religious liberties just like they can in the United States, and that's something to be cherished and recognized, not attacked.
And only democracy
Absolutely.
that's out there. One last question, and maybe it's too specific. So a lot of focus on the peace plan on Israel, on the region, has been on the tribalism of the area. If you look at the states that have really succeeded, you have either nation states like Egypt, or you have tribes. You have the House of Saud. Saudi Arabia is a basic tribe. The Emirates, two different tribes running a country. Do you think that might be a new solution that we might look at for looking at, and even within Israel, there are different regions of Israel, and if you look at it, they're not just Palestinian, but in fact, they're just different tribes. So when you get Palestinian, the word Palestinian, the concept, at least to many of us, is something that has come about just in recent times. Historically, there were no Palestinians, but there were always these tribes. These tribes go back for centuries. Do you think that might be an approach?
Well, it's certainly something that'll be on the table, I think, going forward.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.